Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about how I personally approach apartment visits and which topics I keep in mind to decide whether a property in Germany is potentially a good deal or a bad deal. This video is specifically about property viewings and how to think like an investor when you're standing inside an apartment. This video exists because of a comment one of you left under my last video. Someone wrote, "Well explained. Can you also do a video on a quick checklist while on the apartment visits?" Which helps a lot in deciding if a property is a bad or good deal. That's a very fair question because apartment visits feel important, but many people don't really know what they should focus on while they're there. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Hans. I invest in residential real estate here in Germany, mainly in the south of the country, and I currently own 16 rental properties. On this channel, I share very practical real-world insights into how real estate investing in Germany actually works based on my own experience and real numbers. Before we go deeper, I want to quickly mention something for those of you who are completely new to real estate. I'm hosting a live online webinar on January 31st where I'll explain the full process of buying your first property here in Germany step by step. I go through finding properties, financing, analysis, and common mistakes. You can find all of the details and sign up at germanrealty.org/events. And remember, these expenses can also usually be deducted from taxes since they are related to a possible real estate investment. Even if you end up not buying a property at all, you can still deduct these expenses. Just as a hint. Before we talk about apartment visits themselves, I want to clarify a very important mindset point. From an investor's perspective, there's technically no such thing as a bad property, right? There are only bad prices. Almost every property can be an interesting investment if the price is right. That means I don't automatically reject a property just because it's in a bad condition, let's say. I also don't reject a property because it needs renovation or looks sort of outdated or even looks terrible at a first glance, right? What really matters is whether the condition and the risks are fairly reflected in the price. If there's a completely run-down apartment in Munich, let's say, that needs a full renovation but is priced significantly below the local market, I'm very interested in it. In that case, the bad condition isn't a problem, right? It's an opportunity. At the same time, a freshly renovated apartment can be a terrible deal if it's overpriced. That's the mindset you need going into apartment visits. Another important thing I want to mention is that in most cases, I already know whether I'm interested in buying the apartment before I even step inside it. Before I schedule a viewing, I usually analyze the exposé, the price, the rent situation, the floor plan, and the location, among others. I also use tools like Google Street View to understand the street, the surroundings, and potential location issues. Based on that information, I already know whether the deal is interesting to me from a financial perspective. And I mean, you've seen me do this several times in my past videos, right? If you want to see how I fully analyze a property based on the documents I receive, make sure to check out this video here. In reality, I often only do the viewing because brokers in Germany usually won't sell you an apartment unless you've seen it in person. So the viewing is more of a formal step than a decision-making moment, at least for me. In many cases, I already know before the viewing whether I'd like to buy the apartment if everything checks out. And honestly, the viewing itself hardly ever changes my decision. What it can do, however, is reveal deal killers that make me walk away. And that's why I don't go into apartment visits emotionally, right? I go in to confirm my assumptions or to find reasons not to buy. I also want to clear up another misconception here. I don't have a fixed written checklist that I mechanically sort of go through during the apartment visit, right? Instead, there are certain topics and deal killers that I always keep in mind. Some issues are acceptable if the price is right. Others are things I personally avoid almost completely regardless of the price because they create long-term problems or make apartments unattractive to tenants. So what I'll walk you through now are the main topics I pay attention to during a visit, not a rigid checklist that you sort of blindly follow, right? Let me be very honest about what I actually do once I'm inside the apartment, because this is often surprising to people. In most cases, I spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes walking through the whole apartment, right? I don't open every window, I don't test the doors, I don't check whether a handle is loose or whether a window opens perfectly. That kind of behavior just makes you look like a rookie, to be honest, and brokers usually start rolling their eyes when people do that. I already know the rough condition of the apartment from the initial analysis, from the exposé and all of the photos I got. If a window doesn't open properly, that's not something that influences my purchase decision. Replacing a window, let's say, costs maybe 400 or 500 euros, and my decision to buy or not to buy an apartment is never dependent on a few €100. What I do instead is get a quick overall impression. I walk through the rooms to confirm that the apartment roughly looks like what I expected and that the condition is within the range that was already reflected in the price. If you feel unsure during viewings or don't know what to focus on, I also offer video call viewings. That means we go through the apartment together during a live video call and I guide you through what actually matters and what doesn't. You can reach out to me via germanrealty.org/services. So inside the apartment, there are really only a few specific things I actively check for. The first thing, and also the most important one, is the electrical system. This is something that's hardly ever described properly in any documents I get in advance, which is why I always look at them during the viewing. I look at the fuse box and the general setup of the electrical system. I'm looking for a modern electrical setup with, let's say, 3 wires, meaning phase, neutral, and protective earth, right? I also want to see proper circuit breakers and ideally a so-called FE switch, which is a residual current device that protects people from electric shocks. If there's a proper FE or FI switch installed, there must also be 3 wires in the cable, so that's good. Older 2-wire systems don't offer proper grounding and usually need to be replaced. As a general rule, I would say electrical systems installed from the 1990s onward usually aren't a problem, right? However, systems from the 1970s or earlier should almost always be replaced, and that can quickly become expensive. The second technical topic I pay attention to is the heating system, especially night storage heaters, which in German are called Nachtspeicheröfen. These systems work by using electricity at night to heat up ceramic bricks inside the heater, which then slowly release heat during the day. In theory, this was meant to take advantage of cheaper nighttime electricity. In reality, these systems are sort of inefficient, expensive to operate, and lead to very high electricity bills for tenants. That's why I usually don't invest in apartments with this type of heating unless the price is extremely attractive and a replacement is already planned. In most cases, I already know about heating systems like these ones, these night storage heaters, in advance, because that's of course also stated in the exposé, right? Apart from that, I briefly look out for obvious signs of mold. Mold is often manageable if it's localized and the cause is clear, so it's not an automatic deal killer for me, but it's something I want to be aware of. If the apartment is rented out, I also use the visit to briefly get to know the tenant. I might ask what they do for work or how long they've lived there, right? This isn't about judging the tenant at all, but about understanding the rental situation and stability a bit better. Other than these points, I don't analyze much inside the apartment during the viewing. Most of the real decision making has already taken place, as I described before. During or after the visit, I double check the rent situation in context, right? I mainly look at how long the tenant has lived there and whether the rent is significantly below market level and whether that might even be increased, right? A long-term tenant isn't automatically good or bad. It depends on whether the rent can realistically be adjusted over time. If the rent is far below market and legally difficult to increase, the purchase price has to compensate for that limitation. Vacant apartments are usually more expensive because sellers price in flexibility, right? That's not necessarily bad, but it needs to be reflected in the numbers as well. To be very clear, the apartment viewing is rarely a moment where I decide whether I want to buy. That decision usually happens much earlier, based on numbers, location, and document analysis. That's why it's so important to thoroughly analyze a property before you ever go to a viewing, right? You should already understand the price, the financing, the rent situation, the condition of the building, and the potential risks. If you need help with that, I also support people before the viewing. We can go through all the documents together, evaluate the building and the apartment, and decide whether a viewing even makes sense. You can get in touch with me via my website, germanrealty.org/services. And again, just as a reminder, all of these expenses, such as my consultation services, can be deducted from your taxes as well, even if you end up not buying a property at all. To summarize, I don't use a rigid apartment visit checklist. Instead, I focus on a few key points. I look at the building condition, the technical systems, especially electrics and the heating, the rent reality, and potential deal killers. The most important thing to understand is that the viewing usually confirms a decision rather than creates it. The real work happens before the viewing, during the analysis of the deal, right? If you now want to see how I analyze a property financially step by step, including cash flow, financing, taxes, and so on, make sure to click here. If you're completely new and want to understand how to buy your first property in Germany from start to finish, make sure to click on this video here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.